Hello, everyone, and welcome to UA Coffee Talk. Today, we'll be talking about real world data and implications of IDFA deprecation. Now, there has been a lot of, and if I'm being really honest, kind of bad information being published on this topic. So, today we have with us three real world practitioners and some real data points about what's actually happening. And more specifically, the discussion today will focus on first, real world data and impact of IDFA deprecation. Second, specific changes to how we do UA and marketing based on the effects of IDFA deprecation. Third, implications to product and monetization design. And finally, who are likely winners and losers from these changes. And with us today, we have first Brian Bowman, CEO of Consumer Acquisition. Consumer Acquisition has managed over $3 billion in creative and social ad spend from the world's largest mobile apps and performance advertisers. They see about $150 million a month, if I'm correct, Brian, running through their ad rules platform and work for companies like Disney, Superhuman, Rovio, Roblox, Glue Mobile, Jam City, many others. I believe you guys have done some stuff with AppLovin as well. Second, Mate Lancerik, independent UA and marketing consultant. Mate is a user acquisition expert with 8+ years of experience, specifically in gaming. He's also globally launched 28 games and oversaw over $20 million in profitable spend across different genres of games. And finally, we have Warren Woodward, co-founder and chief growth officer at Uptick. And Warren formerly led multiple gaming UA divisions, including for companies like Nexon and Wargaming. His company Uptick offers a full stack growth marketing services and marketing automation tools platform that powers multi-million-dollar growth portfolios for companies including Candy Writer, GSN, Experian, and Mino Games. So welcome, guys. And I am so glad to have real world experts, guys who are running stuff in actual practice with us today. And so I thought we could go ahead and start with the first question, which is really around what does the data tell us about the real world impact of IDFA deprecation? And how has that fit against sort of theoretical implications? And I know, Brian, you have published a blog post showing some game publishers were down by, let's say, 15% or so to game revenue. But do you have any updates in terms of real world data? What are you seeing right now?
Yeah, hey, good to talk to you today. There's a bit of what we have, and then there's a bit of what's going on at the public company. So I think both of those are interesting data points. The kind of sledgehammer, which is we're seeing revenue down for iOS about 15 to 20% across the portfolio companies that we're touching. So it's a pretty significant impact. But when you peel that a little bit, you realize there's a nuance to the way that that actually is rolling out, where there are different impacts for subgenres. Those games specifically are apps that target narrow audiences. They're hunting whales, or those that are really looking for in-app ads. That's the way they monetize. Those are the most impacted. And one of the things I found fascinating from the series of companies that have reported earnings most recently is they're kind of distilling the impact into two things. One, the uncertainty around COVID-19 and the fact that people are going back to work, things are getting back to normal, is a way of saying that year over year traffic is declining. Two, they layer on top of that Apple's IDFA changes and the potential for continued wide range of outcomes, both positive and negative. So it's really fascinating when you kind of peel through some of these earning reports. Like Iron Source says, and I agree with this, the industry thought that there would be impacts in Q1, didn't happen. Then Q2, it really kind of happened, but a little bit only at the end. And they're continuing to monitor for short-term effects. And Adam, who's the CEO of AppLovin, said they see about 80% of iOS devices are now updated to 14.5 or later. The consent rates are different, obviously, app by app, somewhere between 20 to 25% on the low end, 60 to 65% on the high end, which means about 35 to 40% of people are opting in to share information. So I don't know if that's above or below what expectations were, but certainly it's having a material impact as we talk through the rest of the day. And then Zynga, I thought, was a bit more transparent in what they're seeing. So they're saying that IDFA is having a material impact on the choppiness of its business. They warn that second half bookings could be down $100 million. They've scaled back UA on iOS, and they're adjusting LTV calculations to compensate. So lots of really good data when you read through the earnings.
Right.
Uh, when you look at Facebook, they're saying something I found fascinating, which is impressions are up 6%, CPMs are up 47%, which is a fancy way of saying that uh, click to install quality is down. So, let me pause there and hand it to other folks and see if they have some.
Uh, yeah, that I think that's a great way to set the table, Brian. Uh, I think there's one important earnings report that we didn't mention yet, which is Apple's own earnings report. So one thing that was interesting is they are projecting their own services revenue is going to be down for the second half of the year. And while they didn't spell it out specifics, I definitely know from some sources I have inside there that they have finally started, I think, realizing what some of this data means for their future business impact. I don't think there is a plan yet as far as like how they're going to react to this, but I think it is a relatively recent acknowledgement that Apple is starting to see that some of this data will have a material impact on their own earnings and broadcast out to the market also.
And also, yeah, I talked to some publishers and developers, and like I think they saw even like bigger drops in terms of revenue on iOS since the start of or like end of the April. But like smaller devs and mid-sized devs, like they got a bit scared and moved their budgets to Android already. Until they figure out how to evaluate iOS properly. So they got from spending some amounts of money on iOS to spend the minimum until they figure it out. So trying to find out which schema works and which doesn't and stuff like that. So yeah.
Yeah, Mate, that's an interesting point. Like, and I know, Joseph, one thing you wanted to talk about here is sort of like theory versus practice. And
Mhm.
one trend I've noticed in kind of the whole lead up to this, and after this the switch flipped, is there was a lot of theory talk. There was a lot of
Yeah.
people like trying to like share that they had like the optimal model or ways to work within this infrastructure. But at the end of the day, like the most common thing when I'm talking to other teams, like, yeah, but what are you actually doing? Usually it's more often than not they've just paused spend or brought it down
Yep.
massively with just sort of enough inflow of
Right.
data to mess with it and to tune it. And then I guess lastly, I also wanted to echo Brian's statement. We're definitely seeing in our portfolio a general rule of thumb is the more broadly appealing an app is, the more it's able to kind of still maintain some sort of reliable performance in this environment. And the more niche it is, the more difficult it is. It'd be a very tough time to be like an MZ type of
Right.
product right now.
Yeah. Or in like before the IDFA came, there is probably like every week a podcast with some folks, which everybody was saying like, yeah, we shall see. We don't know yet, but this is what might happen. Come on. Every week, almost every week.
Right.
Yeah. And in terms of that aspect, and Brian, I know you mentioned that certain subgenres of games are being impacted differently. And I think the theory has been that the games that are focused more on whale targeting, so Forex, social casino, games like that would have a bigger impact to those subgenres. And without naming any specific companies, do you guys have any data points that you guys can speak to? And by the way, from my perspective, that's what I've been hearing as well, or seeing, is that to the point about more generally appealing games, like some of those games have actually seen increases rather than decreases. But what we would have thought conceptually in terms of the well-targeted types of games seem to, at least from a few data points that I've heard about, have had a material impact to them.
So a couple things, right? Not just trusting what we're saying. Please, do your own
Yeah.
Yeah,
research. App Annie came
definitely.
out with an interesting part, which is they're seeing social casinos and strategy games being hit the hardest by IDFA loss. To kind of layer on that, we think hardcore and hyper casual are also being negatively impacted. When you look at what advertisers are doing, it's a natural reaction. They're going to try and move spend as much as they can to any viable network, which is driving up CPMs on those networks. So
Yeah.
those guys that thrive and survive on low cost CPMs are finding it very difficult to compete, regardless of whether they're a game or an app. We have AVOD and other companies in our portfolio, and they also are finding the impact from CPMs. So I think it definitely is having a net negative on the industry. The question is, what do you do to get out of it, and what are the next steps?
Right. And just to support the App Annie report, I actually just did a quick data lookup last night, and I kind of published it on my Gamemakers newsletter, where looking at social casino and specifically what we saw kind of through May, June, July is that revenue was relatively stable, but we definitely saw a decrease in terms of downloads. When I basically looked at the portfolio of like the top social casino companies and their number one game and kind of aggregated that up. And so it does seem like there is an impact, at least to downloads. And then we would expect revenue to trail downloads by a few months. So it does seem like there is an impact there as well.
Yeah, what we're seeing happening is people LTV models are built up for a long time horizon, a year or two with forecastable returns. When you shake that up and you can no longer measure things after 48 hours, what we're seeing is people obviously drop spend, but then there's this weird uptick that's going on in organic monetization.
Right.
Obviously, IDFA loss is forcing people into the unknown bucket. So, how do you build a model around that level of uncertainty? It's almost like CPG advertising, where you're going back to Nielsen clusters, and just the loss of efficiency is pretty profound as we start to realize what this means in the sustained long term. Because I don't think we're at full capacity yet. I think not until the end of August
Right.
will things be around the 80%. So I think it will continue to get worse over the course of August before it will possibly start to get better.
Right. In terms of the theory, there was some thinking, and I've speculated about this as well, that the games that monetize more broadly, and I know Warren, you made a similar point, should potentially or could potentially win in the new environment. And so, when we look at a game like Supercell games, Clash Royale, Clash of Clans, we've seen a pretty dramatic increase, and like they've seen the biggest spike in over 3 years. And so, from your perspective, when we see something like that, do we think we can attribute that kind of a change to IDFA deprecation? What do you guys think in terms of other potential winners from the new environment, and whether we can make any conclusions about whether these kinds of spikes are due to IDFA deprecation or not?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of different intertwined things going on here, and part of it ties into what Brian just touched on. So one thing I think that powers the trend you just referenced, Joseph, is if people want a game, they're going to game. They're not going to,
Right.
we're talking about games specifically right now. They're not going to not spend a game, not play a game because they haven't seen an ad lately. So what does that mean? Is like the games that have more like presence of mind, or maybe that people played more in the past. I think those brands have more power than normal. Another factor there is I know sometimes some of those bigger brand names have a tendency to buy on more blended models, all in models. And if that's the main KPIs you're looking at, a lot of smaller to medium sized studios have more of a laser focus on more the UA direct performance. And like those numbers are going to look worse because, as Brian alluded to, there's going to be a higher percentage in iOS that's not tracked in the same capacity. So I think those are two factors that are leading it. Just the presence of mind when when there's less effective marketing, and then also the buying on those blended models. Um, One thing I really want to emphasize that Brian touched on is the model itself. That's a really big area of work for us right now with our portfolio of developers. It's always an area for work with us, and part of our philosophy is building a model that factors in correlated uplift, like basically like the halo effect of the paid marketing efforts, not a blended model where you claim everything, but just like correctly correlating the organic impact of your paid efforts. And we had something that worked really good before this change happened, but we've had to throw that out the door and rebuild from scratch with this. And that's one takeaway I would encourage all people to think about is like whatever model you were using for iOS before June, that model is no longer the right model. And if you're still trying to hit those targets, if you're still factoring organics the same way, it's not going to work. So everyone
Right.
needs to be putting a lot of focus into the data science side, into building a new predictive model for that given product. And it sucks because we don't have very much data to feed it for any of us right now. But that's something that we should all be mindful of. And I think part of this is we just as an industry have to buy a lot of data right now and rebuild those models.
Yeah, well, regarding the Supercell and Clash Royale and Clash of Clans spikes, so I believe it's connected to the IDFAs, and as we mentioned, the spend went to Android, and honestly, like the iOS looks like the whole UI space last year when COVID started. Very low competition, very low competition.
Yeah, those were the
And
days.
yeah, I know. Like for example, I'm seeing for mid-core game, well, CPI is not like a pretty like interesting KPI, but still in US for mid-core game, seeing like $4 CPIs versus like $12 or $15 on Android. Come on, that's super big difference. And I also heard some of the bigger companies try to push iOS 14 campaigns like as soon as they can, just to get as much data as they could. So they could build those LTV models. And as you mentioned, like why the whale oriented games are suffering, it's because now you need to look at the day zero, even like first 24 hours, and then based on those first 24 hours build these type of like LTV predictions and LTV models, which is definitely super hard for the well oriented games.
Right. And Mate, I think that's an interesting point that you were raising about like some of the smaller to mid-sized developers might just be pausing because they're trying to get a feel for the market. And so maybe as they're pausing, companies like Supercell that might be an additional effect where because of the lack of competition, Supercell is able to gain more share. And
Yeah, but
one
like
other point. Oh, go ahead.
smaller or mid-sized companies, they don't spend that much, so
Okay.
the,
So it's not a huge impact.
yeah, it's not a huge impact.
Okay. And Brian, one of the things that you mentioned in your last blog post had to do with kind of a lot of big changes where you were seeing to the algorithms themselves deployed by Facebook, Google, TikTok, causing a lot of instability and dramatic changes in CPM. Do you have any updates on that front? Is that changing? And will that cause a lot of strategies to have to continue to shift as the algorithms continue to shift as well?
Yeah. So Facebook yesterday put out an interesting article that I would encourage the folks listening to read. It's called Privacy Enhancing Technologies and Building for the Future. Um, we're seeing, CPMs are very out of whack. I think it's a natural reaction where people are bailing on iOS because of the lack of optics, moving into Android, which forces up costs. But at the end of the day, really, if you just take as a statement of truth, there's more impressions in these marketplaces. There's more traffic being issued in the marketplaces, and click to install is down. That means traffic quality is down. And so, what if you were a network? What would you do? You would evaluate and optimize your algorithm so that it maximized your own internal eCPM. Logical reaction to loss of efficiency. That means on the consumption side, it gets more expensive for us to buy those people, which is why the folks on the extremes are struggling with it. I don't see that changing in the near future. I think that's a long-term change that is going to happen. What we do next in this privacy forward world, is it contextual advertising? Is it some of the things that were laid out in that article? I mean, these are like 18-month initiatives. They're not Q4 Black Friday, things are magically going to change.
Yeah.
So, if you're a public company, you cannot not spend, right? You've promised a certain growth of metrics to hit the street. You're going to spend through it. You're going to do it inefficiently, and you're going to try and amortize those costs. So is it happening? Yes. Will it change in the short term? No. Is it material? Yes. And if you look at the byproduct of what was mentioned earlier, with the loss of IDFA, you're seeing lookalike audiences start to collapse. So whether you're talking specifically Facebook, AEO, and VO, or other algorithms that are using app events, with a limited amount of people opting in to be tracked, that means the custom audiences are very small. So where an audience used to last 2 or 3 months and we get a lot of efficiency out of it, it's now 2 or 3 weeks. So even the pockets of efficiency that we used to use to drive long-term kind of sustained success are fleeting. They're harder to find and they're shorter lived. So I think that's a long-term challenge, in the way that we've all grown accustomed to this kind of laser efficiency with deterministic tracking.
Right. And I think it'd be great
Well,
to talk about.
one
Oh,
quick
go ahead, Mate.
comment. Yeah, one quick
Yeah.
comment to that. Of course, like the Facebook performance is decreasing, but quite heavily. I think like since the like beginning of March even, and it's getting worse and worse in the last couple of weeks and months. And but I'm not seeing like the same thing as you mentioned with the lookalike audiences. It is actually hard to build those, of course, and like the you need to refresh them pretty often. But it's still like on some games, like these lookalike audiences are actually working better than the AAA campaigns and other types of targetings, which is definitely surprising for me.
Can I also quickly get everyone's opinions on what you're seeing on Google? I think a lot of this discussion so far has been focused on Facebook, but any thoughts there as far as how you've seen them adapt uh, their algorithm
Well, for me, Google UAC is performing better than Facebook, and I'm trying to like move not all,
on
but a
iOS?
lot of the on iOS, not so much. On Android, that's true. Okay, yeah, the iOS is struggling a lot.
Yeah, I was gonna say for us it's been horrible. I'd say like Google has of the big players, like they've done the worst of adapting. It's
Yeah,
this weird system where like they report on the Google modeled installs,
yeah,
and we've had all these conversations with them where they're like, "What are you talking about? It looks great to us with the Google installs," and we're like, yeah, but that's just your own black box logic, and when you use a neutral judgment system of an MMP, it looks completely different. So yeah, we've that's been like the largest area of impact for us is until Google gets their act together and provides some sort of better modeling. Like we've pulled a lot of that UAC iOS spend.
yeah. That's true. And also, like they were the last, almost. Well, they are definitely late with the SKAdnetwork integration, and also you see like the conversions on iOS campaigns like with 5 day delay.
Mm-hmm.
Seriously, like come on, what can you do like in 5 days? Just it's terrible. Yeah, I can.
We're seeing things a bit differently. Just to hammer home the lookalike audience thing,
Mm,
we're talking a broad swath of clients here that are
yep.
kind of spanning the genre segments here, and entertainment and e-commerce. So it's not just gaming related.
Okay.
Um, it is a material decrement in performance, like half of what we've
Interesting.
seen pre May 26th. Google, my understanding of the algorithm is they were probabilistic in their nature, so it's less impactful, but we are seeing a decrement to it also. The one kind of bright spot is TikTok that seems to be doing better. It could just be that many advertisers weren't in the platform, and now they're starting to move into it. But Google is still doing better proportionally for our portfolio than other platforms.
Right.
Better
Meaning
from
it's less negatively impacted. Let
better
me say
from
it that way.
a ROAS perspective, from a spend perspective, or what?
Better from both.
Okay.
So we're
Okay.
able to push spend to it, and we're able to sustain. Now, to be clear,
Mm.
it's not as efficient as it
Yeah,
was, but it's
of course.
not as negative as other platforms.
Well, for me, the clear winner of like the last couple of months is Unity. It's just I'm so surprised how Unity was able to like improve the performance and well prepare for the IDFAs and everything. It's just really amazing how things are going there as well.
If you read the Google earnings and you just do a quick search of it, IDFA didn't come up one time. So that was just like, for whatever it's worth, that was interesting and shocking to me. I think both ironSource and Unity use this phrase, just to toss it out to folks. Contextual advertising, whatever that means to all of us, seems to be the direction in which the world is headed. They both feel like they're well positioned to take advantage of that. The
Right.
numbers were just absolutely staggering when you read the footprint of what these guys have. Um, in fact, I think Unity raised their 2021 guidance by $50 million. So they're bullish on where they're headed and the stability of their network and their solution with IDFA. So that's one of the things we personally haven't done. By the way, Unity captures and analyzes 50 billion in-app events each day, And that's just, I mean, it's mind-boggling,
Yeah.
the amount
Nice.
of information. We do not do SDK networks as a company. That's
Mhm.
something we're moving into. Because I think at the end of the day, we're all going to have to go wherever there's pockets of efficiency
Right.
and move money around, as aggressively as we can.
Yeah,
So
if we
I
had
have
this
slightly.
this
Oh, go ahead, Mate.
conversation like half a year ago or last year, I would say like, oh well, Facebook and Google, well, that's enough to manage like millions of spend. Now it's like, oh, okay, not anymore. You need to add like so many sources to get efficiency for different perspectives.
So I was going to say I have a slightly different take here. So we do a lot on the SDK networks, and we've definitely seen on iOS for certain apps that the SDK networks in this era have started
Mhm.
to represent a bigger portion of the profitable spend than Facebook, than Google on iOS right now. But I've seen a different trend and reason. I'm not going to call out any names, but there's definitely certain major networks that have basically said we won't run campaigns on SKAdnetwork yet. You have to enable probabilistic through your MMP to run, and I see that that's what's powering a lot of that ecosystem still. So it's working now, but I think that's going to be, that's
Mhm.
definitely an at-risk, like kind of short-sighted approach, depending on how
Right.
Apple views the spirit of that.
Right. And maybe as a high level, just to kind of characterize the ROAS ROI loss from IDFA deprecation a bit more. Do you guys have any high level thoughts or kind of benchmarks in terms of what percentage loss that you guys are seeing across the different paid social channels?
Yeah, so that's my generic 15 to 20%, right?
15 to 20. Okay.
If you push back on it and you look holistically, that's the number. If you then you zoom into a genre, it all changes, right? Because
Yeah.
it's nuanced based on are they whale hunting? Are they looking for high end subscribers? Right, all of those businesses should be negatively impacted from the reduction in people opting in to be tracked. So that's a natural byproduct. Those folks, like you mentioned, that are kind of match three or very generic, are impacted, but less so because they're spending and they pick up the loss in organic, and they're like, it's attribution analysis, we can figure it out. So it seems to be different if you're overall maintaining the same pool of people. You just can't attribute them necessarily either to a network or to a source. And obviously, iOS 15 deals with some of that at the network level, but inside of the lookalike audiences, it's unrecoverable.
Mate or Warren, do you guys have any high level
Yeah,
thoughts there?
I have a question. Like, do you think what kind of loss would we see if the spend stayed the same? Do because 20 to, yeah,
Hmm.
15 to 20% maybe, but also because the spend was really low in the last months.
Yeah, but just forget about spend for a second. Again,
Yeah.
you're a network, right? You're in charge. You're the CRO of a network. You've lost your ability to deliver people at a specifically high revenue. You're going to put more low quality traffic into the mix to offset the ability to target on the high end. It's a natural
Mm.
way of doing it to maintain your margins. So I think just the ecosystem's reaction to the loss of specificity is going to be, you're going to have to buy it. You're going to have to spend through it. You can't target it. So there's an advantage as a network, which is I can maintain my own gross margins because you're not going to be able to find more efficient traffic in another source. That I would assume is the bet.
Mm.
So just to add my take here, I think that
Mhm.
the general numbers that Brian provided are roughly what we're seeing across the portfolio. And we bias towards gaming. We definitely have some non-gaming in our portfolio as well. The one area I would diverge a little bit is, so again, part of our work is building the right predictive buying model for each of our developers. And we're actually seeing on some apps, if we haven't essentially got buy-in to a new model, and we'll come to the developer and say, hey, with the trends we're seeing, we think here's how we should adjust the targets based on how we see opt-in, opt-out rates, based on how we see the correlation of organic revenue. If we're still working off the old model, basically if we haven't bought in something new, we're seeing organics trend down too, because we know that good UA has a halo effect. And
Yeah.
so if you're taking a big step down because you're only going to those pockets where you can still hit last year's goals, then you're losing that halo effect too. So some of our really large scale titles have had actually a negative impact to organic. For most of them, for small to medium size, it's been the opposite. It's been like, yeah, or the organic represents a higher percentage as there's more loss. But yeah, on bigger titles, we're seeing negative organic impact.
Right. And maybe now we could kind of shift focus to talk about specific tactics, approaches to how you guys as performance marketers need to change the way in which you do UA based upon kind of the things that we've been talking about. And I know, Warren, you talked to me before about ways in which, even with IDFA deprecation, you can try to model campaign performance. And so could you speak to like, what have you been doing to estimate performance, or how you're changing some of the models that you have to try and, operate in this new environment we have?
Yeah, absolutely. So people are going to have to build up. I mean, we've had it easy on in mobile UA for the last several years. Like you could just look at the numbers and know that you could basically operate off of them. Any team is going to have to get into the game of prediction now, whether you're comfortable with it or not. And one thing I would recommend everyone do today is just one easy actionable. If you're not tracking opt-in and opt-out events yet, just work with your product team and get those implemented. You might not know how you're going to use them yet, but in your future models, you will be factoring them in some way. So I'm not going to get too into specifics of sort of like what the uptick model is, but I will say that like each product is going to vary depending on how you're surfacing prompts to the user, depending on what your demographics are. But you will want to factor in those opt-in, opt-out rates, and you can use that to. Our goal ultimately is we all know that there's a lot less that's tracked now, right? And so we want to quantify that and mix it with what we can still track and have confidence in, and use that to build a model. And it's even messier because it's not a constant. Like this is flowing over time. Like we know that adoption rates have changed over time. We know that even the trends of the percentages of opt-in we've seen changing over time. So you have to also have like dynamic inputs into the ideal model here. So I guess what I'm saying is there's not like one size fits all model here, but identify what are the variables that you would like to feed into your model, and make sure that you're starting to implement those events and track those now, so you can have your data scientist 3 months from now start working with that data, and you build and backtest several different models.
Right. Brian and Mate, do you have different ways in which you guys are kind of modeling performance?
Good, Mate.
Yeah, we're working with predictions, and just to simplify it, it's using an appropriate like multiplier for each cohort, and that changes on daily basis anyway. And like this helps us like get a sense of like what can we expect at least. And I mean, obviously, like the whole methodology changed so much. But even if you don't have the prediction models, like the fact that a lot of developers like decrease the spend on iOS can actually help them like better identify the campaign performance, even when you're looking at the blended ROAS numbers or like the blended numbers. Since the baseline of the organics dropped when you drop the budget, so you can clearly see like what's happening after you just increase the spend as well.
That's
And
a good
like
point. So that's always. Sorry, Matei. I just want to say, like, we have an
yeah,
opportunity right now, because usually, when you're trying to model uplift, you always wish
yeah,
you had a period where spend was just
exactly,
off, so you
exactly.
see a real baseline. So yeah, note if you have a real baseline opportunity, and if you've turned iOS off, like use that as an opportunity to baseline out your organic revenue.
So the tact we're taking, I think, is a bit different here, which is, we're of the belief that we're going to be able to look inside of the walled gardens of Facebook or Google or TikTok, right? So we're not worried about modeling. In many ways, we rely on our companies, our advertisers to do that. The things that are working, at least in the constraints that we operate in on paid social, are top country. So the things doing the strongest performance: top countries, localized ad copy with AEO, ideally with broad targeting. Interest groups are definitely making a comeback. So those things where you can, in essence, formulate a contextual mapping. If you push back for just a moment and you think there's two kind of driving forces that have been impacting the industry for the last couple of years. Facebook and Google with full media buying automation, at least they're push into that. So UAC and AAA. If you say it backwards, they're removing levers from media buyers to simplify the process and level the playing field between advertisers big and small. But as you eliminate levers, you also eliminate the things that make it efficient to do so. If you then layer on top of that IDFA removal, so deterministic to probabilistic tracking, it's a 1-2 punch. And so at the end of the day, we believe that the only primary lever that we currently have, we the industry, is creative in terms of maintaining and driving successful return on ad spend. It's just really hard to do well, right? A vast majority of creative fails. It's about 85 to 95% failure rate, meaning do you beat the best video or asset in your portfolio? Odds are no. When you do get a winner, it lasts about 10 weeks. So there's a brutal cycle of always working really hard to stay on top of the creative fatigue. One of the challenges we've realized, and if you guys have ever seen the movie Moneyball with Brad Pitt, I love the analogy, which is quantitative analysis overlaid against recruiting for baseball. I see that exact same thing going on, but on Madison Avenue. So mobile development teams are very focused on revenue, LTV, um, and retention, but they're not focused on creative fatigue. And because of that, their marketing and product teams are often kept separate. They're not forced to work together. The assets the marketing team has is often behind, for advertising, that is, behind the curve. So, like the movie, right? If you don't fundamentally pivot the model and squish the teams together and come up with a new way of working, you're going to be a dinosaur. The net impact is persona led creative. So, the ability to say, what I read, watch, and listen to, my marketing segmentation analysis or my user motivations, coupling design with onboarding flow, and then with interest groups seems like a sustainable long-term way of doing this. It's just hard.
Well, it's definitely not easy, but you know, that's the industry.
Yeah.
But
So, Brian, if I'm hearing you correctly, it sounds like you are primarily focused on top of funnel to install conversion. But so, are you not doing anything with SKAdnetwork? And maybe I could ask the other guys in terms of like SKAdnetwork conversion value data. How are you guys leveraging that, if at all? Are you guys like mucking around with that stuff to try and optimize your campaigns?
well, I'm pulling those data to get them to the prediction models
Mhm.
and trying to use it that way. And basically, from the prediction models, then optimize campaigns.
Okay.
So to answer your question,
Yeah.
no,
Okay.
we obviously always focus on bottom of funnel, but here's the
Okay.
problem.
Okay.
In this new world, because I didn't layer in IDFA plus media buying automation plus, when you only have one account, right? The restriction of scan is you can only have one account running iOS 14.6 and later. Almost always the advertiser is going to internalize that account, right? Unless we're the agency of record, it's infrequent that we will get access to that account. So that addresses a bit of the problem here. So we do older rather, operating systems on iOS and Android. So it's more of a focus on where performant advertising currently exists. And then on the iOS side, the only thing we're going to operate on is, because the lever you have is how do you drive, I like the phrase earlier, quality UA. It's creative, and it's creative to something you can map it to for targeting, and that's contextual in some form.
Got it.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with the. I wouldn't say like increased performance or increased importance of creative, but just more like people can't ignore it anymore. Some teams looked at it as more optional, or you could get by. We approached it in a different way for our company. So like the first thing we had our engineering team put resources on was actually building like an ASO creative tool. And people, like a lot of people that know me, thought that was weird because my background's always in UA. It's like, why are you guys building an ASO thing first? But we we know that like yeah, the levers we have as UA practitioners are getting fewer and fewer, and so we wanted to build a really robust system to just like rapidly test a bunch of creative and like auto optimize the visuals of the app store and have that be a living breathing thing that you could improve over time, keep throwing more creative at it. And so that was the first actually product that we shipped and built, and it was definitely a big gamble, but we are seeing it pay off, and we're starting to see like our both like the developers we work with now and outside of our circle just starting to be like, crap, we really don't have a lot of levers. Maybe I'll finally do that ASO thing that I've been putting off that like I know I should do, that and getting people to think that like it's not just about like running an icon test. Like you got to treat this the same as you would treat like your ads portfolio of like be constantly testing, constantly innovating, like constantly refreshing. And so that's definitely been another lever of creative that I think people haven't like put enough importance on, and that also benefits your organic conversion too. So that's been another way that we've kind of doubled down on creative.
Yeah.
JK,
But
quick
can any of you
question.
guys talk more
I'm
specific?
today. I'm
Oh,
just
go ahead, Mate.
interrupting you a lot. But the quick question is like, do you
All right,
remember
no
last
problem.
year we had the podcast about depth of performance marketing, and you asked me like, okay, so
Yeah.
is it going to be really that now? Dude, we have more work than ever. Really, we need
Oh
to figure
yeah.
out so many things, really. So
Yeah,
very far from being that.
You can thank Apple.
Yeah,
I always say we're like the plumbers. Like you call them. You hear from
yeah.
people like when the pipes burst, when the toilet's clogged, and it's like we need help right now. It's definitely been the complete. Yeah, I assume. Yeah, Brian, you've probably seen similar. But yeah, just the demand for help
Yeah.
is never been higher.
But just to dig it a little bit more deeply, maybe I could ask again in terms of like SKAdnetwork conversion value. But is there anything specifically that you would recommend in terms of trying to do with respect to how you treat that? And then I've also had this hypothesis, which I've talked about last year, where I actually, based upon the kind of game that you have, I actually think that doing stuff with SKAdnetwork conversion value probably benefits like short ARPU games, meaning games in which your ARPU curve kind of flattens out relatively quickly. But for the well-driven, the more longer ARPU type of games, it's like the predictability is just going to be like completely unguessable, in my opinion. But do you guys have any thoughts on that as well?
Yeah, I can say for me, like maybe it's a little contrarian, but intentionally not investing. Like we invested enough time to research there to think that we actually don't think that's going to be the long-term viable solution
Okay.
for profitable UA. We're building out a different approach that's not leaning on that as the main layer. I don't know if it's going to
Right.
pay off, and like I'm not going to speak to the specifics yet, but I think that Apple has made such a high barrier of entry and such a usable set of tools that either that's got to evolve or we as an industry have to build superior approaches to that. So yeah, we spend enough time on it to say like, we don't think this is going to be super tenable in the long-term effective path, and we put our R&D efforts elsewhere.
Okay.
Which is what I was trying to highlight when I say you've got to completely change onboarding flows. But coupled with that is if you don't have an early signal that someone exhibits behaviors that they're going to be
Right.
a high payer, that's obviously not an easy challenge for design, app designers, because you have to fundamentally change the dynamics of the game to get someone to kind of push to monetize early on. And
Yeah.
that I think is a very difficult challenge.
Right.
If you could, you would, right? If you can get people to pay earlier, we all would have done it years ago.
Okay.
Yeah, of course, it's not that easy to just put some like special offers in today zero and then not fuck up all the economy in the game, right? So.
Yeah. And maybe just to push it a little bit more, Brian, on your point about creatives, any thoughts in terms of how creative testing has been impacted on iOS?
Yeah, iOS is dead. You can't creatively test on iOS. So just don't waste your time. It's all moved to Android. We've published a lot of white papers on our opinions on how creative testing works on the networks. There is no button you can hit in any of them that says treat my best ad as if it's day zero. So remove all history from the bias of the algorithm and let's do a true A/B or multivariate split. They always drag with them creative history. So it's a 3-step process, and we run assets through that. But it's all shifted to Android. The good news, I think, is that Android and iOS have a lot of overlap in terms of monetization. To push it further, we try to go to Singapore and India as a really good proxy for the US. We thought cultural sensitivities in India wouldn't work because we have some odd humored clients.
Works well.
But it works well, and it's a tenth of the cost domestically. So if you move from iOS to Android to international, you'll find some really good low cost mechanisms for doing A/B testing.
Got it. And what about reactivation campaigns? In my experience, I've never seen like huge percentage of mobile ad budget, kind of dedicated to reactivation campaigns. But in this new world of IDFA deprecation on iOS, how are reactivation campaigns impacted, and what's your outlook with respect to budget?
Yeah, it's dead.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
just making
it's so funny. So
it's dead.
the Google
Like
just sorry, yeah, go on, Brian.
you can't do it, so it's dead. So
All right.
you'll have, again, you have 48 hours to determine the viability of a consumer, and then you can create some model that says these people are like them, but their device IDs are gone. So you can broad spray to the universe. To your point, it's kind of like eating your young, right? You bring back in the same people. It didn't enhance your lookalike audiences or your targeting in any way. So people didn't do it very often. I mean, they did as much as they could, which was maybe 10% of a portfolio.
Yeah.
But sustained in the future, not on iOS.
What do you guys see happening to the retargeting focused businesses, companies like Remerge?
Well, hard to
Also
say.
dead.
Hard to say. They
Right,
definitely
there's
need
a
to
lot
find
of
out something.
IQ points, right?
Yeah.
These guys are going to pivot and be smart and
Right.
figure out what to do next. So I certainly wouldn't count anyone out. Here's the good news, because I think the point earlier was a strong one. We're all on the boat together.
Yeah.
So there's no advantage and disadvantage. This is a fundamental shift that hasn't happened since mobile app advertising came out. There's going to be significant winners and losers, and it's going to happen in the next 12 months. And so to the extent that people can invest now to, put together these pieces that we're talking about, it will provide for a long-term sustained advantage. It's clear privacy isn't going to go away. It's unclear how Google will react. My personal opinion is they won't do any of this unless forced to by governments. Why would they, right? They're the world's best at delivering personalized ads. Why would they dumb down their advertising marketplace? It wouldn't make sense unless countries force them, with no alternative to do so. So I think iOS is in a really unique place. How all of these guys react. There's a really interesting post today on a mobile dev memo about what could happen, and the fact that Facebook's, I would believe, natural reaction would be build up the walled garden higher. They've got more first party data than anyone. And then as you ultimately go to the metaverse and or HTML5 games, right? Didn't the whole thing begin with Cityville back in the day as an HTML5 app? So why not just bypass the App Store in total, build up the walled garden around your user base and skip it? So that's the way people are going to react, because they're going to have to, unless the article that came out yesterday about the Senate, initiating a bill to side load games, which, hey, let's go. That would be awesome. Because then I think it shakes up the entire industry in a meaningful way.
Yeah.
I heard a really interesting take recently. I was interviewing Atif Khan, who used to be a very senior person at Facebook Ads, and he had a very different take as far as I keep thinking kind of through the lens of like how Facebook lives off ads, how is it going to reshape its business model? But from someone that had been on the inside there, his take was that he thinks that this is just a catalyst for Facebook to deprioritize the ads part of its business. There's so many other large scale products that they've been brewing there over the last decade or so, and he strongly believes this will be a catalyst for just them basically diversifying their revenue streams and just saying, rather than trying to fight and shoehorn in a new working model for ad revenue, just to make it a less crucial part of their overall P&L.
Right. Okay, and maybe one last follow-up question as far as this specific topic is concerned, but what do you guys think about the CPG style attribution analysis or things like mixed media modeling? How much are you guys looking at that? How important does that type of approach become in this new world?
It's foundational. It sucks. It's less efficient,
It's
and
hard to
it's what
master.
we have. So yeah, I think it's like if it worked, we wouldn't have invented all this other stuff, right? You would have left it there. But if constrained, if nothing material changes, and this is what you have, then you're going to have to, package people up in ways that are clustered them, like a Nielsen cluster, and it won't target the individual, and it will be substantially less efficient, and that's the future. So it will work on AVOD, it'll work on IP-enabled TV, like for the sustained long-term viability and expansion of the industry in terms of performance advertising. It's a very likely path to go forward.
Okay.
Yeah, it's weird. I have a different back. Like I went to film school. I don't have like I took like literally the bare minimum math classes, like one math class in a trailer during summer break one year. So like I don't have the stats background, but I've built a lot of models in mobile. But I guess I've approached it always more from first principles of just like what's the right way to model for this kind of product. So I think that a lot of the stuff we've ended up at has overlap. I talked a lot about our approach to modeling earlier, so I won't rehash that, but it has a lot of overlap with media mix approaches. But definitely, I think that's crucial of just like, yeah, how are you going to measure the contributions of each individual channel when you can't measure them directly.
Yeah.
Well, I think that part of that's addressed by iOS 15, right? I think that'll be very interesting, but it doesn't get you to people.
Can you elaborate on that, Brian? Like what
Yeah,
aspects
I'm way over my skis because I just read it last night in terms of what it's doing. But my limited, so please don't harsh on me if I get this wrong, understanding of this is that self-attributing networks like Facebook and Google have always had an advantage in terms of how they treat traffic. So because there's no arbiter of the real attribution cross-network, they were able to claim view-through conversions that may have been higher than click conversions. In iOS 15, my understanding is that they will be offering cross-network attribution as a company. So it will normalize the way in which traffic looks across all of the platforms, the networks themselves. It doesn't come anywhere close to addressing what happens at the individual level, but at least it'll put the networks on parity. So instead of saying X network is doing better than Y, you'll be able to actually see from iOS, from Apple's view, is that true? So that's if accurate, and if that's coming out, which I understand to be in September, would be a meaningful step forward. Just not at the deterministic level.
Yeah, we will see it 1 month. But regarding the media mix modeling, right now I'm more using like incrementality tests to kind of like get some level of some sense like what's working, which UA channel is contributing to what. Is also like a pretty good way how to go.
Okay.
I mean, to be fair, I think we've all been wonderfully lazy, like with last click attribution.
Oh, well, of course.
Right, like whatever's sufficient, great. Whatever
Yeah.
is the last click, let's take it.
Yeah.
In the new, we've had many clients that do paid search in Facebook, right? Facebook is often treated like top of funnel aided branding. When they turn off Facebook, page search efficiency tanks. So there's a logical value in running display and how that impacts other channels.
Of course.
We're all going to be forced to figure out the components and lay out an attribution model that makes sense. So to the point earlier, like, it's hard to do. We're the plumbers, and
Yep.
we gotta fix the plumbing.
All right. And
But that's the
maybe
beauty part
shifting
of the industry. There you go.
maybe shifting now to like, I know you guys are marketers, but when you think about product and from the marketing lens, what can product do to help improve performance of games? Do you guys have any thoughts on that?
Yeah.
So that's my earlier point. Onboarding flows, early monetization signals, a deep understanding of your personas. So who are you building for? What do they read, watch, and listen to? How are they motivated in the external world, which will allow you to cluster creative and interests? That kind of core marketing DNA will be very important moving forward.
Right. And just for our audience, Brian, when you say like the reason why the Fatu initial onboarding experience would be so important is because we have that initial 24-hour window
hours.
that we can, if we see a monetization event, then we can actually get some, we can get that attributed. So that's why you're saying that's important. But any
so
other thoughts?
an example would be you put a campaign against people that like to kill each other, a campaign that people like to relax, a campaign of people who like to complete levels. The calls to action, the look and feel, those things are all dialed in accordingly. those campaigns would naturally accelerate or decelerate, and the algorithms will be able to cluster behavior of people who click through that style and
I
type of
see.
narrative
Okay.
based on more macro components
Yeah,
of, think about what I read, watch, listen to, the websites I log into, all of that first party data that resides at the networks can get clustered into a stack. That stack is sustainable, which is my definition of how CPG advertising kind of evolves in this world.
right. So a little bit more complicated than what I what I initially suggested. Any other ideas, guys?
Yeah, I was going to say I've been having. I mean, we always work pretty closely with the product teams, but these last couple of months we've been having more meetings with the product teams than ever.
Yeah,
And
than
part
ever.
of this is like to try to get on the same page and like one we have some extreme cases. Like one of our clients, they have a app that's in the home renovation space, and they monetize off of basically like selling like leads for refi loans, and like it's talk about a needle in a haystack. Like that, in that case, it's like very few users, but those users representing like massive amounts of money because it's a percentage of home value.
Right.
So it's like working with them to back out like, okay, cool, we realize maybe this is one out of like X amount of users. It's a very high number, but how do we get a day one high volume data signal that correlates to that, because we still got to make decisions off of this. So it's kind of a silver lining, because I think it's making marketing teams and product teams starting to work together a little more closely, if the org's not too dysfunctional. But definitely, like, this is time to make friends with your product team as a marketer, and like work on that strategy together, identify the events, map out the user funnel together, figure out if there's things you can change to track something earlier on that's indicative of that eventual late funnel event.
Yeah, in the past it was optional to be very good friends with product. Now it's a must, definitely. And like to get the sense of like the day zero to day one, whatever you can get, and as many events and data you can get, that's definitely helpful for the campaigns and the whole UA front.
All right. So, guys, I know we're running out of time, but maybe as the last topic, maybe quickly we can go over who are likely winners and losers from all this fallout. And I know one of the companies that we mentioned was Unity. So Unity seems like they've been a big winner, although if probabilistic is killed off, we'll see. But I don't know. Any other thoughts in terms of winners and losers?
I mean, the obvious is Google, right? But I'm not really breaking any news there.
Sure.
Yeah, what do you guys think? It's definitely it's an hour to shine for all of the small ad networks that were like having trouble getting their emails answered, a year ago.
That's true. Yeah.
I mean, ironically, I think for people who have large first-party data reservoirs, right, the walls they can build around them,
Yeah.
large companies are the obvious winners. The obvious losers are small to medium-sized businesses. And let's be clear, that means people spending less than $1 million a month are going to be negatively impacted. Those that rely on advertising as their primary mechanism for monetization are going to be negatively impacted.
Right.
Those who don't have the cash flow to to roll out an 18-month LTV window and sustain it. So that's on the app developer side. But I think the very large companies, which is why you see so much M&A activity going on, are sustainably advantaged in this change.
Right. Maybe also other winners would be games that have like mid-core games with broad monetization, because as you're less able to target whales, those games will see margin flow to them.
Yeah. IP
Loser
gets
would,
more
oh, go
powerful.
ahead. Right. IP owners. Also, Warren, to your point about retargeting companies, they'll probably have to shift to something else. Any
And let
other?
me just throw out a random one.
Yeah.
Netflix. I don't know what Netflix games is. I have no idea, but they have an awful lot of data on an awful lot of people and an ability to, know what you like. So
Yeah.
I think it will be a compelling offering as it comes out.
Yeah, well, Netflix is more like a data company rather than the entertainment company nowadays.
All right, guys. Well, I mean, I actually have a bunch of additional questions, but maybe we can call it here. I know you guys, some of you guys have some hard stops here, but just to wrap this all up, do you have a final message for our audience? And then how can they get in touch with you? Maybe starting with you, Brian.
Yeah. Whatever you're doing with creative text testing today, 10x it. It's important as a sustainable advantage for you. And you can just go to our site, consumeracquisition.com, and you'll find us.
Mate?
Yeah, well, like Brian said earlier, like don't believe everything we said. Do your own research. That's super important because obviously not everything we said is going to work for you as well. So work on that, and yeah, well, hit me up on LinkedIn if you want.
Okay. And I will provide links to everybody's profiles and websites and things like that. And finally, Warren?
Yeah. Final thoughts. I would say don't be in a hurry to spend your money. I mean, that's one thing that we're telling our developers a lot. Like we always try to treat the budget like it's our own, and we're telling a lot of so some apps are really able to scale there. Some I'm saying like save your bullets. Let's work on the models. Let's work on improving ASO. Let's work on improving the creative funnel, and like let's think more about the annual budget. Let's not think about the August budget right now, because they're like we will figure this out as an industry. One thing I love about this industry is it's very collaborative, and like there's a lot of this stuff that we'll know how to do. Like someone's going to have a breakthrough. We're going to share our knowledge, and there'll be better ways to solve some of these things. And as far as getting in touch with us, yeah, our company's uptick.com. It's upptic.com. We do full service, kind of like bolt-on growth marketing team, creative analytics, UA, and then our ASO tool is available for pretty low cost. We think it's pretty cool, and we use that for all our own clients. So think about investing a little bit on the ASO side, even if it's not with us.
Right. Okay, I think there we have it. 3 real world practitioners, world-class UA folks.
Wait, we got to check in on one more thing. So,
okay.
Brian, you placed a bold bet. I really enjoyed your article, by the way. You placed a bold bet related to Black Friday and Apple rolling back IDFA. I'm curious.
Rolling back some component.
Some component. Okay. Okay.
Sticking with it.
Yeah, I was just curious, like if you were still feeling bullish on that, and what you guys think about that.
Well, here's the fun part, right? The revenue loss that's currently in gaming is one thing. When you remove the ability to remarket and retarget to e-commerce, you really negatively impact Black Friday through Christmas efficiency. It'll be very interesting when that segment wakes up and says, what's going on? So I'm sticking with it. That's what predictions, right? We've got a 50-50 shot.
Which side of that bet are you guys taking?
Not gonna happen.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, there we have it. Thanks for your time, guys. And until next time, I'll catch y'all later. Bye.